There we go.
Lovely.
Hey guys, welcome to Tech Recruitment Training, Season 2, Episode 2. We're joined again as ever by our heroes of the hour, Phil and Darren. We're going to give people a minute or two just to dial in. And while we're doing that, I'm going to find the slide and get that projected on the screen to whet your appetites.
That first 20 seconds where you're waiting to see if those numbers go up or whether you start broadcasting properly is the most terrifying couple of seconds ever.
Is anyone coming? They are, is the good news.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, did I just spend 5 hours of my week preparing a presentation that no one's going to listen to?
I'd have enjoyed it, Darren.
Oh, thanks, mate.
Yeah.
Well, just to see your face for 1 hour, Darren, from my perspective.
Yeah.
I've just spent 2 hours with you guys on another call, so I think we've seen each other's faces enough that I would like some people to see my face.
I actually had the very strange experience, Darren, of waking up to your voice recently because I let my podcast that I put on sometimes to go to sleep overrun, and I woke up to the sound of you on the Tech Recruitment Show, which is available on all good podcast providers. For anyone that's not aware, Darren, I think it's just you up until now, has been hosting the Tech Recruitment Show. So it's a podcast interviewing a number of practitioners and thought leaders in the tech recruitment industry. If you'd like to be involved, then drop us a line. We'd be delighted to hear from you. And always looking for new and interesting guests to have on the show. But that is available if you search for Tech Recruitment Show, or I think Hacker Job on either Spotify or Apple iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, should I say, showing my age. And also on YouTube, I think, Darren?
Yeah, on YouTube. They don't all go on YouTube because as a result of certain providers of broadband going down several times, it meant that we've not had a very strong video. So the majority of people that are listening to it are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and we've had some weird, wonderful places. We've got a little colony in Guatemala that are listening to us. I would love to find out who these people are in Guatemala that are so interested in hearing about me, but clearly there's some people listening.
I would say you have global appeal, Darren.
Thanks.
So we're now at 3 minutes past, and we've got a relatively healthy number of people listening now. So shall we start?
Absolutely. Let me just put in thanks, Phil. Can you just put in a link to the podcast in there as well, just for people that are wondering?
Yeah, I'm popping the YouTube in now, where you can find everything we've done. And then, I'll find a link directly to the podcast as well.
Thanks, man.
Awesome.
Right, so we're getting some comments and Q&A already. Fantastic. So, guys, welcome to Tech Recruitment Training. That's easy for you to say. Tech Recruitment Training Season 2, Episode 2. This week, we're going to be talking about Node and deconstructing that and getting a better understanding for everyone of the Node technology and the software engineers and developers that use that technology. If I can get my cursor key to work, we will go and look at the quick housekeeping. So just a reminder, for anyone who's not aware, you can join our Slack group and follow up on any Q&A. Anything that we don't answer live in the webinar, we will always try and follow up in the Slack group. And it's a great place to ask any follow-up questions and also access all of our library of past content. Just a reminder, if you're posing questions, please use the all participants option. And once you've signed up for these, you'll get a new invitation each week. If you're not receiving those for any reason, please just email us at hello@hackerjob.co. And as ever, overwhelmed by the positive response we've had to this, so please do tell your friends. You can watch recaps of these sessions on YouTube. But also you can shout out to us on Twitter at hackerjob_co or LinkedIn, either messaging Darren or Phil or shouting them out on that platform. It'd be great if you do that, to use hashtag either TRT or hashtag Tech Recruitment Training.
Yeah. I think you can follow HackerJob on LinkedIn as well, and then Daisy's great with updating everyone about all the podcasts that are coming out. So it's another way you can kind of keep up with any new ones that we're releasing that week.
Yeah, there's also a range of article, blog posts, and other updates that we'll share if you follow us on those channels. Course plan, just a reminder of season 2. We are on week 2. So last week we tackled modern Java. This week it is full stack Node.js. And we've got those other content pieces coming up in future weeks, all to look forward to. So I think without further ado, I'm handing over to Darren, who's going to give us a quick précis of what we can expect over the next 50 or so minutes.
Cool. So I think me and Phil both agreed after the session last week. It's a very informative session, but we didn't get so much into the interview process. So I've cut it down slightly. So we'll be doing a node recap of what we discussed in last season. We'll be deconstructing, shall I say, the tech, deconstructing the skills, the experience and salary, and then the interview process.
Right. So give us that recap on Node.js then.
Sure. So Node.js as a whole, so the version we're on right now is version 14.4, which was released in, last month. So the way that Node works is very similar to what Phil was describing last week from a Java perspective, that they release on a biannual or 6-month basis for their versions. So version 13 was at the back end of last year. It was in December. From a framework perspective, people don't often talk about frameworks within Node. It's something that is missed quite a lot. But the frameworks that are often used by developers are Express and Happy. That was based on a survey for 2020, so this is very up to date. From a testing perspective, Mocha and Jest are the ones that you'll see the most. You'll know a couple of other testing frameworks that are often used on the more front end side of things. So stuff like Jasmine will be used more on the front end, but these are much more node focused testing frameworks. And then additionally, the skills that we see most in demand from a cloud perspective is AWS. A lot of people talk about GCP, but we see that as being third in the market at the moment, although with companies like Vodafone pushing it through more and more, GCP might start creeping up on Azure, but we still see overwhelmingly that AWS is the most used cloud system in the market. And then from a front-end perspective, this won't surprise any tech recruiters, but React is the front-end tool that we see the most used. Again, you've got things like Angular and Vue in the back end, in the background, should I say. But React probably makes up 3/4 of the roles we'll see. Red flag wise, although they are, there's some cross examination between the two, React Native to React. They're not used in the same way. React Native is very much mobile, and React is much more web applications. But there is a fairly easy learning curve between the two. They use similar syntax. So if you are struggling for React candidates, that is one way you could get around it, looking at React Native candidates. But again, anyone that works in tech recruitment will also know that React Native is very hard to find. So, but just giving you a bit of an idea. It's not a programming language, which I think that a lot of people get wrong. It's actually a runtime environment. So don't assume that you write in Node. You're writing in JavaScript, but using Node from a runtime environment perspective. And as mentioned in the previous one with the versions, it's continuously evolving. So if you're looking at candidates, the thing you probably, in my opinion, you should look at most is what is this person doing in their background? Are they self-learning? Because you can find yourself, as seen above, very far behind within the space of 12 to 18 months if you're not keeping yourself up to date with the latest versions. Sorry, so. We can't hear what you're saying. You're on mute.
Probably common to a lot of the roles that we're going to talk about this week is when they're very scarce, those skill sets, that you'll be looking for candidates almost by definition that are self-learning and
agreed. Yeah, I think that's
evolving their skills month on month.
I think that's the number one skill set in any developer. Like, are they doing this as a job, or are they doing this as a love of being a coder? And they're the ones you really want to grab.
Yeah. And I think, part of the reason it is so popular is that it is, as you've touched on, written in JavaScript. With Python being obviously the most popular back-end language, I think JavaScript is probably the most universally known language, just with all your full stackers and your front enders. So you've got the availability of talent there that know the actual syntax of the language. You're just teaching them, like you say, the runtime environment. So actually, if you're prepared to upskill, then you've got a wealth of talent to kind of go at.
Exactly.
Cool. Conscious of time, so we're going to push. Shall we push on, Darren, to the next?
Absolutely. Cool. So, like I say, that we're currently on version 14. As with Java, the Node works in LTS and STS, and we'll do a recap of those in a second. But from the big jumps has been 12 to 13 to 14. So 13 is much more of an STS. From a modern framework, like I say, Express and Happy are the two we see the most. AWS 2 from a cloud perspective. Microservices experience is something we see a lot more. When I originally joined HackerJob, we didn't see it so much with the clients we worked with, looking at the architecture. It was more, do you have Node experience? But I think as time goes on and Node becomes much more popular, we're looking to, well, clients are looking for more microservice experience rather than just looking at monolithic architectures. And also a lot of the time, and me and Phil debated this morning, but clients are looking for candidates with full stack experience, not just back-end Node experience. I could think of one client that we work with where they just want people with back-end Node experience. And I think that's as a result really of the fact that, because it's written in JavaScript, it means that the difference between back-end to front-end, you're using the same language. So a lot of time it's a cheaper way to go for you to look at full stack engineers that can do both sides. And they don't need to learn new language, they simply need to know the nuances of back-end and front-end.
Cool. Sorry, my curse key is getting stuck. But so do you want to talk now for skills and tools? Or Phil, did you want to add something before we progress?
No, I think Darren's doing a great job. I'll jump in.
You'll ruin me as soon as I make a mistake.
Yeah.
Keep your powder dry and Phil for the time being. So Darren, talk us through the skills and tools then, please.
Cool. So I'll just quickly recap LTS versus STS. So LTS, or long-term support, is looking at a product's life cycle management policy, where you are looking at, okay, how do we build this across a longer period of time? This isn't just a checkpoint to get us to the next goal. So a lot of time you'll see a lot of longer term adjustments in that. So within versions, you'll have like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. That's looking more at bug fixes. The STSs are looking more at okay, let's make a quick change that will get us so far, but it's not something we're going to support long term. So hopefully that covers those two quite quickly, in case anyone wasn't on the first session.
Okay.
Cool. So the big jump to Node 14 was that there's now diagnostic reporting. So what it does is it generates a JSON formatted file that's used for diagnosing problems. So the problem in some of the previous versions was if you had an error in your code, you would have to go through the entire code base in order to figure out where that problem was, which is very, very time consuming, as you can appreciate. So what they've done now is they've got diagnostic reporting so that you can do a little bit more TDD approach to everything, where you can look through and go, okay, I can find the error quite quickly so that you're not having to comb through lots of data. They've also improved the streams, so it's added and improved network communication. So now you're able to handle bigger data sets within Node, which oftentimes when companies were looking at that, forced them to have other languages in the background, not just Node, because Node couldn't handle big data sets. But that's now been fixed to some extent. And then the removal of experimental warning. This won't mean a lot to us guys, but because of the 13 being an STS, it meant that there was a lot of features where they were in like beta stage. So there was experimental warnings pop up, which have now gone away, which as a developer probably means that it's a nicer ecosystem to work with. And also something of note is that Node supports for 30 months after launch. So that means that everything up to Node 9 is currently being supported. Anything before that is no longer supported. And what we mean by that is that bugs, features, etc., won't be looked at. So it's important that developers are using the latest versions, because otherwise they will run into errors.
And I think that ties in with what we've been talking about the whole time when we're talking about modern software engineering. The diagnostic reporting obviously feeds into that kind of monitoring, and like Node.js and tools like that. When you're looking at kind of after the DevOps team have made a deploy, how do you ensure that you're able to diagnose problems and kind of keep the system up to date? And then the improved stream, like we've talked a lot of times about real-time data streaming and how that's the the modern form of kind of data engineering moving on from ETL. Again, you've got a language that's going to improve your ability to kind of handle those sorts of processes, then it shows why it's a very popular language of choice, alongside the availability of talent and the things that you've already kind of touched on, I think.
Exactly.
Okay. So talk about the ExpressGIS framework.
Cool. So what we'll do now is we'll just take you through a couple of different frameworks that pop up. Like I say, oftentimes, and I'm not sure if it's the companies are very agnostic about the framework from the Node perspective, or whether it's the companies aren't aware of which framework they should be using. I don't often see it, Phil. I don't know if you see it a lot on profiles or on job specs.
I think you see it a lot more on the candidate side than you do on job specs. Yeah, I don't think we see a lot of it where companies are specifically wanting people with Express experience, but they are out there.
Yeah.
There are quite a lot of candidates with it, but yeah, it doesn't seem to be like and maybe it's just got quite a quick learning curve. So actually, as long as someone knows how to code JS and work within the Node environment, actually learning Express is maybe quite a quick process. To be honest, it is not something I'm
fair enough. Cool. So Express, like I said, is like one of the best known frameworks within Node. So the reason that a lot of people use it is because of the speed and flexibility of it. It's also often used when developing both mobile and web applications, i.e. why you see it across different areas. It's very quick and fast when looking at dynamic sets of features, used on both multi and single page applications. And it also comes with an MVC. If anyone doesn't know, I've kind of written down there, but it's Model View Controller. So it's used for seamless architecture patterns and creating applications. We'll move us on down.
Great. Moving on.
Cool. So Happy is used mainly when developing REST APIs, along with kind of other applications. It's used a lot of time for configuration and stable, reliable systems. So if you're looking at developing everyone's looking at developing a stable system, I guess. But if you're looking at that in particular, that's one of your main goals. You might use Happy. So it's flexible and can be used across different databases. So anyone that kind of knows about databases will see MySQL and MongoDB and Postgres. So it can be used both across relational and non-relational databases, which often isn't the case. And it's used, and it provides a JavaScript template engine. So it's used for rendering dynamic content and making it easier. So when we're talking about that, dynamic content, we're talking about when a page loads up, does everything pop properly, rather than being very static.
Cool. Am I the only one that's getting Pharrell Williams like running through their head when we talked about the Happy framework? But maybe just me. Moving on.
Cool. And the final one we'll go through is Socket.io. So this is focusing very much on what Phil was talking about a couple of minutes ago. It creates real-time applications. So it's ultra quick and works on ultra speed, and it provides similar APIs to both the web client side section and the server side section, which often isn't the case. So oftentimes those two areas are separated, but Socket.io allows them to work intermittently and together. And then there's event emitters in Socket.io, which allow the developers to establish bi-directional communication between both the web server and the server side section of it.
Cool. So why should an organisation be choosing Node, or why might a candidate have chosen Node to use as their framework?
Yeah, so I guess we see Node a lot more in our scale-ups or the kind of unicorn clients, but it's often used where it's easy for like scalability. So if you are, and that's why a lot of those companies will use it. So if you're going from, I don't know, 40 people to 1,000 people quite quickly, Node is going to be a good language for you. So when we're talking about scalability, we're talking about how that code builds over time. So could you, as you enter more and more into that code base, does it scale properly? It's considered to be easy to learn, although having spoken to a lot of the developers that work in our own team, the tools that they'll often learn in is PHP and C++. So Node, as we'll go through later, is often seen as being I don't want to say progression line, but it's often seen that PHP, you'll go from PHP to Node. So that's why there's kind of some nuances between that. JavaScript is used as a single programming language. So it means that as a developer, I can be both front end and back end / full stack, which is what we're seeing a lot of clients moving towards, looking for full stack teams, not just looking for a back end team and a front end team. Obviously, there's the benefits of being full stack, like I say. It's known for offering high performance, handles requests simultaneously, which a lot of languages potentially don't. And then there's the advantage of caching that isn't offered in a lot of other languages, like I say.
Interesting. And on the flip side, what might put you off from using Node?
Yeah, so the first point is being changed slightly with version 14, like I say, but it's considered that the APIs aren't as stable as they are with other languages, but that often comes down to the fact that it's really in its infancy in terms of languages compared to if you look at a C++, a C# or a Java that have been around for a lot longer. So it's kind of building right at the moment, but as a result of, like I say, it being in its infancy, it doesn't have a strong library support system, and it's not got a synchronous programming model. So I think that will change over time. And I think if you look at the pluses versus the minuses, I think that's why you can see that Node is becoming much more popular, because a lot of the minuses that come by using Node are stuff that it's just because of the age of the language, not because it's not a good language to use. So I think over time we will still see Node increase as being one of the most popular languages.
Got it. So as the technology and the ecosystem around it matures, then some of these problems might
exactly, yeah, they'll just evaporate.
Well, I think it needs its Spring or its .NET Core, really. Like if you look at the other popular backend languages for applications, so not C++ and Python, where you get a lot of algorithmic stuff, embedded stuff, so you're not necessarily using the likes of Qt and Django that often, depending on the project. But if you look at the really big ones, Java and C#, well, they have .NET Core and they have Spring, which adds so much functionality to them. So like when you say in there, it doesn't have a strong library support system, that's just about time. And yeah, basically it probably needs its own like comprehensive framework rather than just Express and Happy that do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. But is there a compromise then, Darren? I feel there must be, because this slide exists.
Yeah, so I guess the compromise when I'm looking at Node is how can we increase the talent pool within Node? We'll get into it in a couple of minutes, but Node is an area that everyone wants Node candidates, but they're not widely available in the market. So I think that the compromise at the moment looking at it is, okay, will you look at people with other backgrounds? Because oftentimes we'll see, and me and Phil have this argument all the time, but if you come from a PHP background and you've got a year's Node, okay, why wouldn't you look at that candidate? What do you gain by adding 5 more years in a language to others? So oftentimes we'll see people transitioning from PHP to Node. Do you need that cloud technology? Can they learn that? And also the testing tools and methodologies. So like how long does it take to upskill in a language? And what end result are you looking for is probably what companies need to consider. So if you're looking for a mid-level, do they need to have 3 years Node experience, or can they just have 3 solid years experience as a developer in another language, and then maybe 8 months, 12 months, 15 months as an actual Node developer?
Yeah, and I think on that as well, like particularly if someone's been full stack PHP, so they've been coding in JavaScript for 5 or 6 years, they've only worked in the Node environment for like let's say 6 months or 1 year. Yeah. But a lot of the other things that they've got the syntax down. given they've been a developer 5-6 years, they've probably got some mentorship or some leadership experience. Hopefully they've got a good testing approach. You know, the one bit they're missing is an extra month, a year and 6 months of Node or something like that. And I think there definitely is a compromise to be had there. And then, yeah, like you say, on the cloud tech, well, to be honest, we don't see too many devs these days that don't have any cloud experience, but it's about quantifying how much they have and what do you actually need them to do. You know, if the project they're working on, they're not actually going to be setting up cloud like infrastructure and things like that, do they need a massive knowledge of that coming in, or is it something that, like you say, you can upskill on? And then I think with testing, you know, again, it's very rare you see a developer these days that doesn't at least unit test. And if you are looking for TDD, well, the process of teaching someone who can unit test how to code in TDD is really not a huge process at all.
Yep, great.
Cool. And so when we're talking to these types of candidates, then Darren, what are the types of questions we want to be asking them?
Sure. So what version of Node are they working with? Like similar to frameworks, I guess. I don't think that companies really take this into account very much. So within Java, let's use Java as an example again. Within Java, you oftentimes will know what version of Java this candidate's using, whereas I don't think that's really taken into account with Node very often. Also, like I say, with above, companies don't really think about what frameworks candidates have used, which makes it a little bit easier because it opens up the market for yourselves. But also, what are you looking to achieve from that candidate? What is that candidate going to be doing when joining the business? Because if they're looking at real-time applications, maybe you want to look at candidates with Socket.io, or if they're looking at someone that's used an MVC, do you want to use Happy, for example? So that probably needs taken more into account. Like Phil says, what best practices are they following? Most of the time we'll see candidates have used unit testing. It's very rare to see candidates that haven't done some unit testing. But asking that question, like what best practices have you followed in your role? Agile environments, have they worked within one? i.e. are they looking at pair programming or anything in that regard? Databases, so have they got experience with a relational or a non-relational database? And that gives you a bit more understanding of the environment they've worked within, because although they may have used the language, it doesn't necessarily mean that they fit your environment from a tech ecosystem perspective.
Yeah, and I think just on version, I touched on it last week, like an anecdote about obviously a candidate that had on their profile that they'd been using, I think, Java 13 in the last company. Yeah. Because I knew Java 13 wasn't released while they were working at the last company, it opened up a conversation. And again, it's not about holding it against people. I appreciate, you know, people do try and play the system. They know the keywords, they know what people are looking for. But you can then advise someone that actually, by being a bit more honest, the fact that you're working with Java 12 is still pretty advanced. You know, it's absolutely fine to be open and honest about that. So not only can you spot someone who's working with the most advanced versions, but by knowing those release dates, you might also catch out someone who's potentially not presenting themselves in, you know, the most accurate way, to put it politely.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if I saw a candidate that suddenly had Node 14.4 on their CV, I'll be like, okay, so it was a release last month. If it's released, that doesn't mean that it's going to be out in the wider market. These versions often take several months at best for the wider market to start utilizing them. So be mindful of that, like Phil says, when looking at candidates. Okay, what version are they using? Okay, they're using, probably most candidates right now will be using either 10 or 12 as their LTSs. So if you suddenly see 14, then you've got to start thinking.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say, if they're claiming commercial knowledge of Node, if you see someone who's already researching into it and can tell you about some of the new features, then clearly that's someone who's quite passionate about tech in general, but particularly about Node. So 100%, if you see people researching into the new ones and keeping up to date with it, that's great to see. But yeah, be wary that, like Darren says, it takes companies a little bit of time to onboard new tech. So, I mean, even at the moment, we're still seeing a lot of companies that are still using Java 8 and 14's out. Yeah.
Okay. Just wait for my cursor button to work again. And so delving into these slightly more technical questions, what might they be, Darren?
Yeah, so like I say, we haven't historically seen a lot of companies interested in in microservices from a Node perspective, but I think it's important to understand what kind of environment have they worked within, because over time we're going to see this more and more important, that a lot of companies work within a microservices architecture, so you're going to want to understand that because of the amount of information going through your pipelines. So asking that question, but also asking, have they got experience in different cloud and DevOps tools? So I'm talking about, like I say, AWS is the main one, but have they used stuff like Docker? Have they used stuff like Kubernetes? So we're seeing more and more over time, the companies are looking for their software engineers to be more well-rounded, so got experience across all areas. Even if they're not necessarily doing a lot when it comes to DevOps, they want them to understand the nuances of it so that they can work cross-functionally if required.
Yeah, and then the flip side of that is, and this has kind of always been the case, that you get DevOps engineers from a sysadmin background or a programming background, but that sysadmin background is almost being kind of completely overlooked these days. I think the roles are kind of coming a little bit closer together. Like you're seeing developers that have a lot of skills you would traditionally associate with a DevOps engineer. You're seeing DevOps engineers with, ability to unit test and program and all of this sort of stuff. And kind of the roles in terms of the tech are kind of merging together in that sense, but the responsibilities obviously still differ quite a lot.
Yeah, I think you've seen that in stuff like cloud engineering. We're kind of going off the Node topic here for a second, but I guess you've seen that quite a lot in stuff like cloud engineering and platform engineering, where these guys really are as good at developing as they would be in the infrastructure side of things. So I agree that with like an Azure engineer, you're starting to see that, yes, they're an expert in the cloud, but really they're an engineer too. They're like a software engineer too. Joe, do you want to move us on to the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe give us a bit of an insight about the types of salaries and experience levels that we'll be expecting to see with these types of candidates.
Yeah, so I thought this is quite an interesting graph when I saw this yesterday. But you're seeing there that if you look at, sorry, I realised my cursor isn't up there, but if you look at January 2012, the median has actually remained fairly the same. You'll see that if you look across to Jan 2020 and then down because of COVID, obviously there's been a downturn, but overall the median has remained the same. It's actually, if you look at the percentiles, that you're seeing there's been a big differentiation. So the percentiles for 10th to 90th range is significantly going up year on year. So I think that as with any language, you're seeing that the salaries are going to keep increasing. So what I would gauge from this when looking at my own internal systems would be, how are we looking to get around this? There's always going to be an element of that with the way that every market works from a GDP perspective, but are we continuously reevaluating the salaries that our team are receiving? Because if you're not, then someone is going to be in that market and you'll end up with a bad attrition rate for candidates, because these people are very hard to find. So it's not just consuming from perspective of your time, it's consuming from perspective of how many candidates is the hiring manager going to need to see, et cetera, et cetera. So I would always keep an eye out on the salaries that we're offering at any given time.
Yeah.
And don't just, sorry, before you go.
No, but carry on. I thought you'd made a point there.
No, I guess the final point I have on that is that I spoke to a company not last week, the week before, and what they were saying was that they feel like, because of the way the market is going right now, that for once this is very client-driven market, whereas usually it's candidate-driven, that you don't necessarily need to offer the same salaries as what you did before. But I think that's a very short-sighted perspective, that look, this is going to bite you in the bum in 6 months' time when the market does an upturn, then suddenly everyone's hiring again, because that candidate's going to realise that really they could have got 5-10k more elsewhere, and they'll go elsewhere.
Yeah, I think particularly when you factor in IL-35 only got pushed back, it didn't it didn't necessarily get cancelled entirely. So next spring we're going to see the influx of contractors into the market. How's that going to impact it? The salary expectations are going to be quite high as well. So I think the interesting thing on this is it kind of alludes to the scarcity that we've been talking about. So initially you see, quite a high level, because obviously you've only got a few companies searching for it, but you've only got a few developers that know it. So you're having to pay over the odds. then candidates learn quicker than companies on board. As we've touched, it's a lot easier for a candidate to do some personal learning and upskill within Node, more easy and quicker anyway than it is for a company to onboard that. So then you see a bit of a drop because you've got a lot of candidates that know it, and companies that are actually using it are only slowly increasing. So actually there's a big wealth of talent out there. And then I think over time, as you see more companies on board it, suddenly that scarcity comes back a little bit more because you're hiring a lot of those nodes out of the market. And I think that's why you see it slowly kind of creeping up again.
Yeah, and I think even though what we're seeing from a downturn perspective is quite interesting to look at the 10th to 90th percentile at the end of, I guess we're 6 months into June 2020, that it's very rare for you to get, from a percentile perspective, a node developer below 40K. And I often see salaries that are 32 to 35, and some of that comes down to your location, let's be honest. So if you're in Dundee, for example, you probably, although I don't imagine there's much node in Dundee, but due to the price of what your local market is paying, you might be able to get below it. But if you're looking in London, you're very rarely going to get a node developer under 40K.
Yeah. We've had a Q&A come in. It is something that we're going to dive into a lot more next week when we're actually looking at AWS-focused DevOps engineers. But I think we can touch on it now. So from Simon Fear, what are some good questions to assess AWS cloud experience further? I'm finding nearly all seniors have cloud experience, so wanting some probing questions to assess further on the call.
Do you want to take that one and then I'll add into it?
Yes, so I think it's just about getting an understanding of what they've actually been doing with the cloud. Like, we touched on it a few times during these series. There isn't really a company out there that has a sizable population of software developers, DevOps engineers, whatever you're going to say, and aren't cloud-based. Like, I think the nature of developing means that you're probably creating a web-based product. You're probably making, or you're creating, some enterprise solutions where you're going to have cloud infrastructure. Like, super rare you would see any company in 2020 that isn't associated with AWS or GCP or Azure in some way. So technically, every developer in the world could put that on their CV. They have worked in a company which uses AWS. So they have some familiarity, some association with it, probably picked up bits from the wider team. But what have they done personally? So what responsibilities did they have that utilized AWS or were impacted by AWS on a daily basis? So have they built cloud infrastructure in terms of, utilizing Kubernetes? Have they, or Docker, have they actually created a container themselves for the cloud? So it's really just about digging into how have you been using the cloud. It's great to see AWS there on your CV, but on a day-to-day basis, what was your interaction with Amazon Web Services? What do you know about it? And I think that leads you on, because their answer there, they're going to then tell you, okay, so, this is how I was using it daily, this is how I was using it monthly, and give you that initial insight. And then I think your questions can kind of lead on from that, and you should start to build a picture of who has the more experience with it. But what I would say is at your stage, so at your initial recruiter stage, that should be enough. You being able to collect that information, note that down, and get a good idea of how everyone is using the cloud. Whatever your process is, if you then go to your hiring manager and get them to review your notes before they request, then that should make, if it didn't make entire sense to you, it should make a lot of sense to them, and they should be able to see, wow, this person's using the cloud in a very complex way, this person's not really using it, they're associated with it. So I think from your side, just ask about the responsibilities, get that information down, and then if needs be, your hiring manager should be able to make that decision on how complex that is. But over time, as he or she is making that decision and feeding that information back to you, it's going to increase your understanding, because you're going to know what good looks like and what bad looks like from that, dependent on the needs of your particular company.
Yeah, and I guess just building on that, you've kind of taken from a technical perspective, but just some hints and tips of how to get around it. When I look at a profile, oftentimes I steer away from, when I look at profiles and go, okay, is this guy within the community going to be a fit for the client A? Are they putting on their profile stuff like, we did this, the team did this? Because when it's something like that, it's exactly what Phil's talking about, where they're not talking about how they've used it, they're talking about what the company did. And then you need to delve a lot further into, okay, but what did you do with it? Because is it just you've got an understanding and appreciation for AWS and you used it in the background, or are you heavily involved with it? And then another technique, and I don't want to teach people to suck eggs, but I always tell my team about the ask questions, shut up model, where ask them, okay, how have you used AWS? And then stay silent. Yeah. Because you're very quickly going to find out their experience. If you start asking them questions about, okay, did you use AWS in this way? It's very easy for the kind of go, yeah, absolutely. Whereas that doesn't really tell you the answer. They're just giving you what you wanted to get from it. Whereas if you ask them the question and shut up, that is their chance to really give an insight into where their background is.
Yeah, definitely use the silence. Yeah, I agree.
Dale, do you want to move us on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just enjoying the candor of the session today. So we've had a quick look at those salaries. So what are the sort of things that influence those salary expectations?
Sure. So as with the one last week from Phil, this is taken from PayScale. I won't say this is our data. This is from PayScale, so I like to make sure we're consistent across all of these sessions. So PayScale, we've got the average salary of Node being 62.5 K. This is the UK, which kind of goes in line with what we had on the last page. And then average bonuses is about 5%. So a little bit below actually what we see in the industry. I'd say the industry is probably more like 10%. From a gender perspective, I don't think this will surprise anyone, but from a gender perspective, it tends to be 9 in 10 developers are male. Something I'm quite passionate about, that companies need to be supporting stuff like STEM. So we're bringing more women into the industry, not simply going, we're looking to do a 50-50 split on our shortlist, because you can't create a shortlist when there aren't the candidates there. So if anyone listens to TRS, they'll hear us talk about this when we're talking to dunnhumby. But yeah, that's something that I think companies should be looking at. But that's how it is now. And then from a skills perspective, React will pull up your salary expectations by about 10%. PHP, interestingly, across the market, if you've got a background in PHP, that will pull up what you're able to command. I think that oftentimes that comes down to a lot of the formerly PHP companies have moved towards Node. So they want candidates that can work with some of their legacy tech as well, rather than just working on greenfield projects. AWS, as always, will pull up your expectations. And I think, interestingly, SQL, so working with relational databases, tends to pull down your expectations a little bit. So I think what PayScale may have missed here is talking about how some non-relational databases would have pulled it up. But that's something we're seeing as a trend across the industry right now, that a lot of companies, although they still use relational databases, as we move to a bigger data model, you'll start seeing the relational databases being the key database that an engineer uses as being a negative.
And I think when we've commented on these before, I think we've called out these are they're a correlation, not necessarily a causation here.
100%.
So knowing SQL isn't going to make you a worse Node.js developer necessarily.
No, it's more that what do you use alongside it?
Yeah, it's the associated things that maybe go along with that.
On the gender point as well, saw a really interesting scheme set up. I can't for the life of me remember. I'll drop it into the Slack channel afterwards. Set up in Manchester a few years ago. That's getting a lot of national coverage, growing a lot, which is a returners scheme. So I think that's obviously getting people back into work that maybe were a software developer and have had to take time out. Obviously, the most common reason that people have to take time out is maternity. HackJob, we do actually do a lot in terms of getting people back into work that have taken time out. Maternity, I think we kind of bumped the industry average in terms of how many people we do place from that sort of background. But I think that's another way that you can try to improve the gender equality within software development. It can be hard for women to get back into work after they've had a child. So by doing a retainer scheme, upskilling them, giving them the most modern tech, and building on the experience that they had prior to maternity, then that's another way that you can try and get more women into your company from a tech perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. Like, I can only talk from my own family perspective, but my mum, when she had both me and my sister, stayed out of work until we were at we were at primary school. So it meant that she essentially was out of work for 6.5 years. If you look from a Node perspective, if the versions are coming out biannually, that means that she would have had to go back to, well, I'm having to do my maths here. So she would have had to go back to version 6, or maybe even lower than that, might be version 4. So like by that point, you're completely out of the loop on stuff. So I agree that there's some great companies out there, and I'll name a couple like Vodafone are great at it. I know Capgemini are really keen on it. Cognizant do a lot on it too. So I think the more that you can influence that returner scheme, the better you're going to do.
Yeah, and I guess it's about finding those hidden gems of talent where maybe they're getting overlooked elsewhere. So, conscious of the time, I'm just going to move things along. Just a quick summary here about the number of candidates available.
So this is in the UK, and anyone that works up north will know that, in our opinion, maybe you disagree, but we see the north as being very C# heavy, whereas London is very Java heavy. I think it's interesting, though, that JavaScript, from a developer perspective, is actually the second from what we can see in the UK from a talent perspective. And I think what's interesting there is that summarizes to me that there's a lot of companies that want Node candidates that really don't do enough of transforming someone to a full stack developer rather than just looking at front end skills. Yes, there'll be some developers that won't want to move to a full stack role, but there'd be a lot of developers that actually do have a huge interest in it, but have never been given the opportunity. And someone has to, in my opinion, take the plunge at some point. So one company is always going to be that first company for a candidate to take them into a full stack role. So if you are that company that are willing to give them the opportunity, you're going to win a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think when we look at what motivates developers and why they join a company, learning a new skill, like I think from the Stack Overflow survey 2020 is right up there. I think 75% of developers pride themselves on learning at least one new framework a year. So if you can give them the exposure to a popular, modern, sought after runtime environment that is Node, then for a huge percentage of those 139,000, that's going to be a really big sell on your company.
Yep, agreed.
Cool. Okay. And so what are we looking to avoid then?
So there's a few bits we sort of
and salary.
Yes, so there's a few bits that we need to go through. So I'll kind of skip on from this, but like I said at the start, React Native, when you're looking at CVs, React Native can be advantageous if you're looking to open up the pool a little bit more, but don't just look at React Native and go, okay, they could be a React developer, because there is some nuance to it. Anything from a support perspective, so yes, they might be using Node, but like, what are they doing? Are they building new functions, or are they just supporting those functions? I don't particularly see this as a red flag, but a lot of clients do, like someone coming from PHP or C# and not necessarily coming through Node as their initial backend language. So look at that to some extension, but I won't worry too much about that. And then no cloud experience or no experience building microservices is something that we'll see more and more being a red flag within the industry.
Cool, and everyone will get these slides emailed to them after the session, so we can go back over those if needs be, or follow up on Slack with us. So now we've found some great candidates. What's the best way to get the most out of that interview process?
Yeah, something me and Phil are very, very passionate about. So get them engaged from an intro perspective. So you should be qualifying and selling yourselves as much as you are. As much as you're getting the candidates to sell to you. It's a two-way street. I think a lot of companies miss that. And that's why candidates fall off their engagement, because they go into that call, get asked a lot of questions about themselves, but they never really get explained. It's never really explained to them why they should join you. And right now, like I say, there's been a downturn so that companies can get away with this a little bit more. But Node especially, they've got so many opportunities because there's so many companies that want to use Node that you need to be selling yourselves. From a tech call perspective, asking relevant questions around your role so that you're establishing whether they're a good fit. There's nothing worse than not asking the right questions and then someone getting through to a final face-to-face. And then there being a simple question around a particular tool set that's pivotal to your business, And then the candidate go, yeah, we never spoke about this during the interview stage. I didn't know this was a big deal. Yeah, I don't have this experience, and you've wasted everyone's time. So asking those relevant questions up front and making sure that you know they have the skill set in all the areas. And then from a face-to-face perspective, you're obviously looking both at technical but cultural. So it's an opportunity, again, to sell your business and make sure that if you want to offer them, they're going to accept. So something that me and Phil talk about a lot is companies need to always be qualifying over and over again, because the candidate's expectations might change during the interview stage. Like they might have interviewed with another company, and I'm not just talking about salary, I'm talking about that another opportunity might have come up where this company can offer, I don't know, 90% greenfield, 10% on legacy. So if that company is offering that, you don't want to just keep talking about, okay, it's 50-50. You want to say, okay, but what can you do in this role that is going to help and improve you? So always re-qualifying on that side.
Yeah, I think definitely if you're treating the intro call as a box ticking exercise, you might as well automate that.
Yeah,
a survey or record your questions and send it to them and ask them to send it back. Like it's a perfect opportunity to find out a bit more about them, what makes them tick. You know, if you have great learning and development within your company, ask them what they want to learn, and then, you know, sit there and listen to them for 5 minutes, gauge how passionate they sound about learning, and do they have all these ideas in mind. And if they do, then great. All the way through the process, you can be reminding them about all the cool things that they want to learn that you can facilitate for them. And that's, you know, that's just a learning and development example. There's great culture, great management, all of these things. The more that you sell and get that information on that first call, the more you use that throughout the process. And I know a lot of good recruiters do, but again, we have come across some companies where that intro call is a 10-minute box ticking exercise, and I just think it's a waste of everyone's time, the recruiter included. And then, yeah, on the tech call, I think recently, Darren, we saw an interview process where the company requires Angular, and the entire tech call was questions on React. So the candidate came back and was like, yeah, I gave answers I could, but at the end of the day, I'm an expert in Angular. So, and they want me to use Angular in the role. So while other questions to get a gauge of their overall technical experience are great, you know, we might think about bringing React on in a year. What do you know about that? You know, you'll assess how well-rounded they are, but really, like, you're bringing them in to do a job. You want to assess them on the tools they're going to use to do that job.
That's exactly the example I was thinking of as well, Phil, when I was saying about the tech call.
Yeah.
Great. So I think we've got a few more slides on this. So conscious of pushing on time. We've got 8 minutes remaining.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this,
have we maybe summarised this?
Yeah. So I think a lot of this will be stuff that people can pull out in the when we send it across. But like me and Phil were saying, that first call it's a twofold call. So you're talking about your company as much as you're talking about them. So don't just say we're company A. This is the amazing stuff we do, and this is why you should join. Look at it from the candidate's perspective. So don't just talk about this is what we're doing as a business. Talk about what you're doing from a Node perspective, or talk about what you're doing from an engineering perspective. It's going to get candidates really, really interested. Candidates do care about what's happening from sales and marketing and all that kind of stuff too, but ultimately they're not joining your sales and marketing team. So don't focus too much on that stuff. Focus on the innovations that they'll be a part of as much as anything. So I don't know if you want to add anything on there.
It's just, I think it's getting specific. I think every company in the world, not every company, some of them are a bit more honest, but every company in the world says or thinks they have a great culture, or they have great learning and development, or we have a fantastic management structure, or all of these things, but quantify it. You know, if that person's heard from 10 companies that day, all of which said that we have a great culture and we have great learning and development, you know, which one stands out? They're all claiming the same things. Whereas if you can quantify that and say, you know, we've got a great culture, this is what we do internally, you know, maybe you do surveys to get feedback from the staff, and these are the things that we've actioned, like actual tangible things that you can give to someone where they can sit there and go, wow, that's quite impressive. Because just saying great culture is very fluffy, and as I said, most companies will say that. And the same with learning and development. Like, tell them what they can learn, give them examples of what people have learned. I know it was a while back now, but Elsevier, I know, used to have a stat where the previous year they'd sent like 5,000 of their engineers on machine learning courses. Yep. When you drop that into a conversation, people actually wake up a little bit and go, wow, okay, so you know, you are kind of putting your money where your mouth is. I've heard 5 companies today tell me that they had great learning and development, but not a single one gave me any examples or told me exactly what I could learn, or more importantly, asked me what I want to learn, and then tell me that, you know, they're happy to kind of facilitate that and teach that. So yeah, I think get specific would be my...
Yeah, and my other pet peeve is although I use it quite a lot myself, but digital transformation. Everyone is going through digital transformation. Don't just say we're going through digital transformation and leave it there. It's like, but what are you digitally transforming? Can't get the word out. Because like if you're going from an e-commerce business that was seen as bricks and mortar, and you're now pushing everything online, okay, what would they be working on? What have you done to innovate? Because every company under the sun is going through a digital transformation. But what's more interesting is what are you doing in that digital transformation? How far are you along it? Because that's what is really going to be interesting to an engineer. Because even if you're at the start of it, there's a telco company we work with that are very, very early in their transformation. But in reality, the exciting part of that is that they get to, candidates that join now are going to be involved in huge greenfield projects. So that's a selling point. Or if you're later in the process, like, okay, so you've currently transformed to this tool, so utilize all that information.
Okay, so just conscious of the time, the last few minutes, we might get to the last couple of slides.
Yep.
So what's important to call out in the technical call or technical?
Yeah, so I think Phil summarised this quite well, but focus on the essential skills of a candidate, and then focus slightly on the nice to haves, but they're more to not get someone out of a process, but just more of an understanding, because you want to make sure that when they go into a face-to-face, you have given all this information to the hiring manager about, okay, their skill set is this, they do have some experience here, because I am very much of the opinion that if the hiring manager is asking the same questions you did during your second call, there's an obvious error somewhere, that you aren't passing the information on, or you've not asked the relevant questions, and candidates are getting through unright. And then what will the candidate get from this will be like confidence that the skill set that they have is going to be right for that role.
Okay. And then I think we've got final piece here.
Yeah, cool. So like I said, building on the last one, I think face-to-face, for me, if a candidate gets to face-to-face, you shouldn't be asking them, okay, do you have this skill set? It should be more knuckling down on, okay, you have this skill set. Can you tell me about how you've used that skill set? So it should be less qualifying, do they have it, and more qualifying, how are they going to use that skill set within the role? So it should be looking at some projects that you're working on at the moment. Okay, how would you do this? Like, what would you work around, etc., rather than just qualifying, do they fit into the team? And then some technical conversations around the business, but also every business now is looking at an agile environment. So how can this person fit into your team, not just from a tech perspective, but from an environment perspective? Because we all know developers work very closely together. So you need to make sure that they are going to work well.
Okay, and I think we've got a couple more to finish this off.
Yeah, so face-to-face, this is kind of obvious stuff, but make sure you're showing them around the office. Make sure you're introducing them to the team. And when I say introduce to the team, I don't just mean like, so the director of engineering is doing the interview, and then you bring in the head of engineering. What you really should be doing is showing them their peers so that they can ask questions. I know when I joined HackJob, I made sure that I met several people in the company, because you want to understand what your peers are doing as well. Tell them about a local area. This will probably change slightly with COVID, but right now you want to consider, okay, what is around me when I'm going to work? I don't really want to go work in Timbuktu and not be able to get to anything for lunch or anything like that. Tell them about some of the great things the business is doing, both internally and externally, from achievement perspective. So what are you doing for the environment? What are you doing for the economy, et cetera, and then sell them on the role again. So make sure that you are explaining to them why you are the best company for them, not just, okay, we're one of the good companies for you. Go make a decision. You want them for you to influence that decision, not them to make that full decision. And then give them a chance to ask questions. I don't think every company does this right now. I think a lot of companies will get to the end of their interview and leave about 2 minutes for them to ask questions. And by that point, the candidate is 2 hours into the interview and is probably a little bit tired. So make sure that you are giving them the opportunity to ask questions throughout.
Great. I think that's our last slide. So it's a perfect moment to end. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Darren, and thanks, Phil. Informative as ever. And to everyone that's dialed in, thank you for joining us. Any questions that you've got, you want to follow up, we'll be getting these slides to you, I think, later today or tomorrow. But do join us on Slack or on Twitter or LinkedIn. And we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thanks,
Cheers,
guys.
guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.